Hello again, I'm back, and this is my Your Questions and My Musings series. This is actually part 5. Most of it is being led by questions from one of my subscribers, and I'm trying my best to at least show my understanding and leaving it out there for you to decide. In this next video, he was speaking much about the question of time. And I just yesterday posted a video which would be from my Did Einstein series, and it happens to be part 9. And there's many of the explanations that I will touch on now that are already in that video, albeit it was posted after yours was with all of your questions. So you said that time is a big part, but it doesn't seem to be doing what we think it is doing. And it is doing on one level of consciousness what we think it's doing, because the understanding of time that we have is one of the creations that we can have out of the fullness of the consciousness that is. Einstein mentioned that time is relative, and many examples of this can be seen in our human realm. So that is another example of a condensation or a type of manifestation of time in this human realm. So you say, what is this thing called time? And it is a very good question. And I like playing around with the answers that go along with this. The first one, I would like to invoke a thought process on what is called sacred geometry. Now, this sounds a little bit scary, and for a long time I didn't understand what it was all about, or again, all of the different manifestations that I would read about sacred geometry. Just seemed to confuse me more and more. And then I do not remember where it came from, but I read this particular statement, and all of a sudden sacred geometry fell into place. And I do briefly mention this in chapter 2 of my second book, Did Einstein Understand E = mc squared. The quote that I would like to read for you is this: that sacred geometry is a consciousness experiment of the physical state and of time. So what that breaks down to is that from the all of consciousness, the consciousness that is, consciousness is experimenting with the physical state, which we can definitely say is this human realm, and consciousness is experimenting with time. Isn't that a beautiful way of understanding sacred geometry? Sacred geometry's definition is that there are certain patterns that are continually repeated that are creating our entire human realm. And so in my book, I have said that sacred geometry is actually the human realm that we are experiencing, a consciousness experiment of this physical state and of time. So one of the manifestations of time was from Einstein, and it is that time ceases to exist, or it slows down to a stop the closer a mass approaches to the speed of light. And another concept that Einstein gave us was that this same mass at that speed of light becomes infinitely great. And I've given my spiritual interpretations of those two in my Did Einstein series, part 9. You mentioned that you have a failure to come to grips with time. Don't worry about it, because it is a very elusive concept. because so many people are condensing different interpretations out of the all-potential consciousness that would match their experience of time. So what we must first accept is that every definition is a potential creation. So what I do is I listen to these definitions and I try to play around with them in my consciousness. And I toss them to and fro and I turn them over and back. And then I come to one that finally, or maybe two or three or whatever, that resonates best with the experience that I am having about time. And that's when I think this sacred geometry definition made sense to me, that it is an experiment of consciousness in the physical state and of time. That's what sacred geometry is, which is this human realm. Simply an experiment. I love the idea. We need to begin to use our creative abilities to take, and it takes practice to use our creative abilities to create what we want to create out of time or out of everything. But as I said again, it's quite fun when you get the hang of it. We must leave alone the human desire, which becomes almost a need to fix everything. Quantum is the world that is completely unfixed. And for me, this is exciting because we have full capability of every potential if we would only believe it and if we would only practice it and therefore create it. Einstein is one of the classical examples that I give in my books. Again, Einstein wanted to fix what he saw happening in the universe. And he created an equation called the cosmological constant in order to fix the universe. But he had to drop this particular creation because the Hubble Space Telescope showed us that the universe is not fixed, that it is indeed expanding. And I've already gone into how that correlates to our expanding consciousness, that it is one and the same thing, because our consciousness is our universe. The creation of our consciousness is the creation of our universe. So Einstein saw that the universe was not fixed, and therefore he had to let go of this creation that he wished to make because it no longer matched the experience. And so that's also a lesson for us to learn, that the creations that we are trying to make, if they're not manifesting, there's probably some universal consciousness reason that it should not be manifesting for you in your experience. Time stops near the point of mass as mass becomes infinitely great. I'm returning to that. And you mentioned that at that point we can see past, present, and future simultaneously. And yes, this is true, because at this point of mass becoming infinitely great, in other words, with us transforming back to the full potential all, then we know all. We are all knowledgeable. We are all existing in an enlightened state. And so therefore, yes, we can observe the past, present, and future simultaneously, because they don't exist as separate essences in this potential all of consciousness. There is no time. And so we can play around with past, present, and future simultaneously, because time does not exist in this all potential state. Let's see if that's where I should, yes, I think that's probably a good place to stop, and I'll be back again with another part.